Hello and welcome to the YYC Soccer Podcast. My name is Jason Kmet and my co-host is Scott Strasser. Hi, Scott.
Hey, Jason. How's it going tonight?
Pretty good tonight. Got a couple Cavs matches to recap this week. And so I think we'll have a couple things to talk about for sure.
Yeah. As always, I think there's a lot going on in the world of Calgary soccer. And we try to keep our finger on its pulse. And we have a lot of different things to talk about tonight. Not just Cavalry, of course, but a few other local teams and a tournament that's happening in the near future in the Calgary region.
You bet. So if you are a new listener, what is the YYC Soccer Podcast all about, Scott?
So kind of touched upon in that last answer, but we focus on soccer in Calgary at the amateur, collegiate, and professional levels. We talk about the teams and the players from the city's soccer community, from the grassroots and amateur leagues up to the university and professional level.
This week, we'll talk a bit about Cavalry and their previous games and their upcoming game. We're also going to talk a little bit about Foothills WFC and where they're at in the UWS. We'll briefly talk about the men's national team and the Calgary Connections. And we're also going to do an interview this week with coach for the Alberta Summer Games. Scott, you want to talk about that a bit?
Yeah, so we interviewed Nick Zuniga, who's coaching the Zone 3 U14 boys team at the upcoming Alberta Summer Games in Okotoks. That's going to happen July 20th to 23rd. It's not just soccer, of course. There's a whole bunch of sports that are going to be taking place in Okotoks that weekend. All teenage level, like teenagers competing across multiple sports. But yeah, from our perspective, we are mostly interested in the soccer. So we talked to Nick about the Zone 3 team, which is Zone 3 is technically the city of Calgary. So anyone who lives in the city and is in U14 was eligible to try out for that team. So yeah, Nick talked to us about the tournament, about his own team and his own coaching.
And we'll run that in a few minutes. But first, let's start off on the agenda. Let's talk about the last couple of Cavs matches, and we can start with their match against Pacific, which was a pretty massive win.
Yeah. Cavalry came into that match 2-game win streak, but Pacific came in on what I believe was an 8 or 9 game unbeaten streak and with a 5-point lead at the top of the CPL table. So Cavalry earned a huge win on the road, beating Pacific 2-1 to end that unbeaten streak that Pacific was enjoying and extend their own win streak to 3 games. Very impressive result. Eric Kobza scored his first goal after an admittedly lucky bounce off a Pacific defender meant the ball fell just in front of him inside the box. Meyer Bevan would have been offside on that play, but Kobza wasn't, so he finished it quite nicely far post to put Cavalry up 1-0. Cavalry's second goal was a really well-worked team effort, also in the first half, capped off by Fraser Aird, following a really nice back heel to set him up by Meyer Bevan. Easton Ongaro brought Pacific back within a goal in the second half with a really close-range header, but Cavalry was able to hold on for the 2-1 win. While Cavalry did play well, you do have to think Pacific would have been annoyed after that game. They were quite wasteful with their chances, and Manny Aparicio missed a penalty kick that would have really brought an exciting finish to the game. Pacific also had a really great chance, and I think it was like the very last kick of the game in the 96th.
It was, yeah.
Yeah, 96th minute that somehow, I can't remember who it was, but I think he kicked it over, and the ref blew the whistle for full time right afterward. So Pacific couldn't get it done in front of their own fans.
Yeah, I was thinking about watching that match and how I know Tommy Wheeldon Jr. has made a couple comments previously about how sometimes the breaks just didn't go their way in previous matches. Like they didn't get a result because the lucky break just didn't go their way. Well, this seemed to be a match where they were kind of getting a bit of repayment on that, and a few lucky breaks did go their way, like regarding the missed penalty and that sort of thing. And I agree with you. I thought they played well, but they were the beneficiaries of a couple of lucky breaks, which is part of the game. So every now and then it's good to get that, and it helps you get the 3 points.
Yeah, and I think, and as good as Cavalry played, you do have to kind of talk about Pacific's own lack of finishing. And I was very surprised that Manny Aparicio skied his penalty. Him of all players, I would expect to just confidently slot that ball home. He should know Carducci as a goalkeeper now. He's one of the more confident players in that Pacific team. But no, overall, a great result for Cavalry, and it continued what had been a very good run of form for them.
Yes, and the one other thing I wanted to add in about that match, which I just feel like I need to mention it, is that Fraser scored that really nice goal. But I do think that even besides that goal, that's one of the strongest games I think I've ever seen him play. I was really impressed with him in that match in particular. I don't know how you felt about it, Scott, but I thought in general that was a really strong match for him.
Yeah, and he's had injury problems ever since joining Cavalry. So he's one who's probably, we're still waiting to see. He was so strong for Edmonton, I think, was it 2 years ago before he joined Cavalry? And then ever since he's kind of come south, he hasn't replicated those performances. But this particular game was kind of what he's capable of. And that goal was so confidently curled into the top corner. I also really thought Meyer Bevan played an important role in that goal because I think the defenders were not expecting him to backheel. And yeah, he did this tricky little backheel, and then the ball was just perfectly weighted for Fraser Air to take a shot.
Then last night, Wednesday night, the Cavs had a match at home at Spruce Meadows. They played Ottawa and they lost 2-0. They never registered a shot on goal during the match.
Yeah, well, I saw the first half of this game, and then I had to take off to go to my own game right after. It was still 0-0 at half, and based on that first half, I would have expected a goalless draw. It was a really stop-start game with a lot of fouls and just the ball going out for throw-ins and goal kicks and whatnot. Neither team had generated a shot on target up until that point. So I was a little bit surprised to learn later on that Ottawa had won 2-0. But if you consider the historic head-to-head record between Ottawa and Cavalry, Ottawa really does tend to have Cavalry's number, regardless if they're playing at Spruce Meadows or in Ottawa. I think Tommy Wheeldon Jr. has denied that Ottawa is Cavalry's bogey team, but the results seem to check out that they are.
Yeah, and I watched the match in its entirety. It was, frankly, it was a snooze fest. There wasn't a lot going on. It would be if you were trying to convince someone to become a soccer fan, that would not have been the match to show them. Ottawa did what they do sometimes, and they're good on the counterattack, and that's exactly what happened on that play. And they basically got the penalty, and then Bassett slotted it in as he would, and then they got the second goal to sort of wrap things up. But there was never really a lot of signs of life from the offensive unit on Cavalry in this match. It just wasn't happening, and probably a combination of Ottawa's defense and maybe you have an off night offensively. But yeah, it just wasn't happening offensively yesterday for the Cavs.
Yeah, which I think fans were probably surprised by, given how confident Cavalry was coming into the game. But I think you got it right. Ottawa sets themselves up in a way that makes them hard to break down. They do look for the counterattack, and I imagine Cavalry knew that Ottawa was going to play like that, so they set themselves up in a way that was supposed to negate Ottawa's countering. So it was just an example of two teams not really wanting to let the other team do what they do best. Yeah, I think I watched the highlights, and that was, I think, a legitimate penalty kick. I know that Cavalry's defense was really protesting the decision in the 80th minute, but it did look like a pretty blatant trip by Carducci on that play. So, yeah, Ottawa got the penalty kick in the last 10 minutes, and then Cavalry, obviously pushing for the equalizer, left himself a little bit vulnerable at the back, and Ottawa took advantage 6 or 7 minutes after they took the lead. But I think a noteworthy talking point is the fact that 17-year-old Calgary Foothills player Michael Harms was making his pro debut at right back. So that was pretty neat to see such a young player, and he really looked young. But to see him, come in and start against a tough defensive team was pretty great. And I'm sure the Foothills coaching staff were really pleased to see his inclusion.
I was watching and I was quite impressed with him, and he does look like he has some definite skill and something to look forward to in the future.
Yeah, I think when you're that young and you get in, I always try to see how scared is the player, right? Does he want the ball, or does he get it and does he just pass it to the nearest teammate so that he's not the one who's, who everyone's eyes are on? And he didn't play like that. He looked like he was keen to be out there. He wanted to get on the ball. And when you're that young, I think that's what you're looking for. So I think, he can hold his head up high about his performance. And I think considering the position that he plays and that Roberto Alarcon's injury is expected to keep him out of the lineup for, I think, like 8 or 9 or 10 more weeks.
Something like that.
Yeah. So Michael Harms could be getting a few more call-ups in the second half of the CPL season than he was probably expecting.
Yeah, I would agree. So exactly for the same reasons you say, because of the position, and it could work out well for him.
And I think a lot of players earn their chance because of injuries to other players, and then they run with it. So that's probably what he's going to be hoping to be doing.
Let's talk about Foothills WFC, and a bit of a disappointing note. They're not going to be competing in this year's UWS playoffs. I know last week we talked about it, and we were kind of under the presumption that they were maybe going to get in, but no, it's not happening.
Yeah, you informed me of this today, which was quite a shock, because I'll just read what's on the UWS website, which is that the top seed of the West Conference goes directly to the national championship, bypassing regional playoffs due to the travel and time constraints involved during the season, end quote. So that means that Santa Clarita Blue Star, who finished just ahead of Foothills in the West Division standings, will be the only team from that 5-team division to qualify for the postseason. Both Foothills and Santa Clarita had the same 5-2 record, but Santa Clarita did have a much better goal difference. So it really seems like Foothills' season was derailed by that one road trip to California where they lost both games.
Yeah, it just seems like it's really unfortunate that even if they could have managed to draw in one of those 2 games, they would have it. But it wasn't meant to be, I guess. But yeah, it's pretty disappointing that they had a strong season, but in those 2 matches were enough, I guess, to get them out. But yeah, it's unfortunate. I feel bad. I was really hoping to see them, and I really looked in advance to see what the playoff structure was going to be for the UWS this year, but I wasn't having a lot of luck finding it. So last week I'm like, yeah, there's going to be a way they're going to get in as a wild card or something. But yeah, no, it's not happening.
And I think that whole league needs to just have longer seasons. I mean, a 7-game season is so short, and I know it's you're limited, and you've got college players who need to report for preseason in August and whatnot. But I just feel like that season should really be 9 or 10 games minimum. It's such a short window, and yeah, all it takes is one mediocre weekend to really knock you out of the playoff contention.
Yeah, you're right. I know there's that narrow window of time, but it would be nice if there was a way that it could be extended a bit. So let's move on to the Canadian men's national team. And every week that they've been playing, we've kind of been doing a Calgary-related update. We had the one match this week. It was the quarterfinals, and Canada was playing the USA, and they brought it all the way into extra time, but they did not win the match. And Scott Kennedy was the only Calgarian involved in this match. He was a sub late in regular time and was an own goal that bounced off his back.
Yeah, but he did look pretty good up until that point, and even after it. I don't think you can really put the blame on him, honestly.
Oh, no, not at all. He looked really good on some of those set pieces. But yeah, that was just unfortunate. I know he was like kind of laughing afterwards because like, what are you going to do, right?
Yeah, exactly. You could see on his face, it was like, well, can't really do anything about that. And to be honest, he looked so much better than he did during this game than he did during the Nations League final against the US a few weeks earlier, when he was, I think, really struggling as the center in that back 3. But no, he had a strong cameo up until that own goal. It seemed like every cross from the US was being headed out of the box by him. And I think he had an important block or 2 as well. I mean, it was unfortunate to go out of the Gold Cup in penalties, but if you'd told me heading into this game that we'd be tied with the US after 90 minutes, I honestly wouldn't have believed you. My initial prediction was pretty pessimistic that we were going to lose 3-0. And then in the first half, after about half an hour, I said, well, I think we might only lose 2-1. So the fact that we tied it and then almost won it, I mean, overall, I was pretty impressed by how what is essentially Canada's B lineup did against the US, who I admit wasn't their strongest lineup either.
Let's set up our interview with Nick Zuniga. So as Scott mentioned before, Nick is the head coach of the Calgary representative in the Alberta Summer Games, and he has a long history of being part of the Calgary soccer scene. Scott, you want to talk a little bit about that before we run the interview?
Yeah, so Nick I believe he's from Edmonton originally, but he's played for a lot of teams in Calgary, including some of the professional teams that have passed through the city. So he was a member of the Calgary Storm in the early 2000s, as well as the Calgary Mustangs in 2004. So those teams played in the USL A-League. And then after that, he played for Calgary United, the kind of semi-pro or competitive men's indoor team that played in the Canadian Major Indoor Soccer League for a couple of years. So he has a lot of ties to the Calgary soccer community. He's also working for Mackenzie United Soccer Club these days as their boys program coordinator. And yeah, he's coaching the Zone 3 or Calgary U14 boys team at the upcoming Alberta Summer Games. And we chatted with him about that.
Yeah, so let's run that interview now. And here's Nick Zuniga.
I'd like to welcome Nick Zuniga to the podcast. Nick is the head coach of the Zone 3 U14 boys team for the upcoming Alberta Summer Games, and he's also the boys coordinator for Mackenzie United Soccer Club in Calgary. Before all that, he was a member of the Calgary Storm and the Calgary Mustangs professional teams in the USL A-League in the early 2000s, and he was also a player for the Calgary United indoor team that came to be shortly after that. Nick, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, guys.
So we'll mostly be talking about the Alberta Summer Games. And just to start off, can you kind of explain what the Alberta Summer Games are and how soccer factors into it?
Yeah, so it's an event that's held, I believe, every 2 years. COVID played a big part. I don't think they've had one since 2018. But it's all sorts of different sports, athletics, baseball, cycling, football, you name it. And cities bid to host it. This Summer Games will be in Okotoks and Black Diamond. They'll be joint hosting. The soccer part will take place in Okotoks. So there's 8 zones when it comes to soccer. Zones 1 to 4 are the southern zones, and then 5 to 8 are the northern zones. We find ourselves in Zone 3, but it's a pretty cool experience for the boys to go and not just be around soccer people all the time. You get to see athletes from other sports, and for myself, I get to see coaches from other sports and kind of pick their brains about how they prepare as well.
Being involved in a multi-sport tournament has those advantages. I want to ask though, so you're the head coach of the Zone 3 boys team, and that's the immediate Calgary area. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, so and when were tryouts held for that team, and what did that selection process for the players look like?
So we had it in early spring. There were 2 original sessions that were scheduled. We had 108 boys, I believe, register to participate, either 2009 born or 2010 born. So we had the first 2 sessions at the Calgary West Soccer Center inside the bubble there. Managed to get a couple of 9v9 games going each night. We whittled the list down after those initial first 2 tryouts, but we weren't sure enough about who the final 4 or 5 guys might be, who the alternates might be. So we decided to have 2 more, which we had in Oak Ridge. And after we had those 2 11v11 games, we had a pretty good sense of who was in, who was out, and how we wanted to handle the alternate situation as well.
Who are the players that you were able to select for this team? I know they're U14, but like where are they playing their soccer right now? They're I'm guessing it's a mixture of a bunch of different clubs, probably Tier 1, AYSL, that sort of thing.
Yeah, so the beauty about this team actually is that we don't have one club that sort of dominates the roster. In my previous life, before I got appointed this position, I was on the girls' side of the game, actually. So when I came over, I was able to come in with a clean slate, not have any predetermined ideas of players, good or bad. So we were really starting from scratch. So the boys that performed at the tryouts were the ones that we selected. I think the team that has the most players might have 5. So it's a pretty balanced roster. And yeah, most do play AYSL. The ones that don't are playing in a higher age group in Tier 1, maybe because their clubs don't have AYSL at the moment, or because their clubs have moved them up to play at a higher level or a more experienced level. So it's a good balance of boys that we were able to put together.
Okay, and since players are coming from different clubs and maybe levels, what has the chemistry building process been like among the players so far? Like, how often are these guys getting to see each other and kick a ball around together?
So our sessions are once a week. We don't want to add too much to their schedules already. They do have a lot going on. AOSL and Tier 1 schedules can get pretty heavy. So it was important for us to not overload the boys and have a bunch of injuries and things like that. So we've only been going once a week. I thought maybe that would make it challenging when it comes to chemistry, but honestly, the boys have been awesome. From day one, funny story, the night before our first session, two of the boys played against each other and there was a bit of a scuffle, and we addressed it first thing at our session. And, they went over and gave each other, a hug, and that was it. And they squashed it. And ever since, it's been an unreal atmosphere to be around. It's exciting, and hopefully that translates on the field as well.
Yeah, so that's interesting when you say about you have about one practice a week. So I want to know from a coaching perspective, how do you approach coaching a team like this where you don't have a chance to have a lot of training and a long time to really work together? How do you adjust your coaching style for a situation like this?
Yeah, for example, if I'm coaching at a club and, I'm getting to see the boys every other day, you do work on, a lot of fundamentals, a lot of, technique and good habits. Once you get to a tournament like this where you have a limited amount of time together and, we're competitive enough where we want to go and win this for Calgary, it does become more tactical. It does become more about, the way the team wants to play, set pieces, formation, things like that. So that's where the majority of our focus has been. We do have a small mini camp coming up next week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, during the day at the soccer center, where we do plan to spend a lot of time on that exact piece, which would be the tactical formational part of the game.
So I know from covering past summer games and winter games too, that with the player depth, Calgary and Edmonton's zone teams in a lot of team sports tend to dominate or win these types of tournaments. How do you feel about your own team's chances based on what you've seen so far? And yeah,
I would expect that to be the case, especially in this sport where you got a large population base, and usually when you look at provincials and things like that, the top teams do come out of these two cities. So I do expect the two zones to be fighting for the championship, but I also wouldn't put anything past anyone else either. I've been around the game long enough where I myself have been on the side that has kind of surprised somebody. When the Calgary Storm back in the day, the Whitecaps came in for a friendly and we beat them, and I don't think anybody gave us a chance. So you learn your lesson, as you grow through the game, and we're definitely not going to take anybody lightly.
How can fans watch the tournament if they're interested? Is there a schedule available?
Yeah, so there's a website. It's 2023asg.com, and it's got all the games, all the events. I believe there's daily passes, which get you into all of the events. But I also know that the soccer, obviously, it's a bit harder to contain, and we're not playing in stadiums or anything like that. So we expect to have a pretty good turnout for our games for sure.
Nice. And I think the last question I want to ask you, Nick, is what makes a multi-sport event like the Alberta Summer Games a special experience for those who take part, particularly the athletes, but also the families of those athletes, sports fans in general, and the coaching staff and volunteers who help make it all happen?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty special event. I mean, there's over 1,500 volunteers that are helping with this event. And like you said, with all different sports, they've got an athletes village where we all have to stay in for the 3 days. And it's about getting to meet other people in other sports, learning a little bit more about sports, maybe appreciating things that they do and the way they train that we kind of in our soccer bubble don't really get to see very much. So as a coach, and I know for the players, it's important to go there and represent Calgary properly and put our best foot forward, but also, be open to learn a little bit about other sports and who knows, maybe one of the boys decides they want to try it as well. So I think it's going to be super exciting for everybody involved.
Awesome. Well, I think that's a great place to end it off, Nick. But
Okay.
Alberta Summer Games coming up July 20th to 23rd in Okotoks and Diamond Valley. So thank you very much for your time today and for answering our questions.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks very much to Nick Zuniga for taking the time to be interviewed for our podcast this week. And after doing that interview, Scott, I think I'm looking forward to seeing how this all plays out with the Alberta Summer Games. It does sound like a pretty cool event in general.
I think these type of multi-sport games, I've gone to them before. Airdrie hosted the Winter Games a few years ago. And in 2019, the Red Deer hosted the Canada Winter Games, which is kind of a step up from the provincial Winter and Summer Games. But overall, it's so fun to be in those towns or cities when those events are taking place. Every restaurant you go to, every business you go to, everybody's talking about it. And I think in Okotoks, there's a lot to do. If you have a free Saturday or Sunday that weekend, I'd highly recommend making the drive down. Go watch some sports, go check out a brewery or something, go drive out to Diamond Valley, see what's going on over there. Yeah, it's just a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm going to still have to get used to this whole Diamond Valley thing, but I like the idea of it. It's just after being Black Diamond and Turner Valley for all these years, I guess that just shows us old guys here takes a little bit of getting used to, but I think it's a good idea and it's a pretty good name overall.
I think it's a great name, yeah, and I think the amalgamation was probably the right choice for those two communities. Although it's funny because I think they still refer to certain facilities and businesses being in, it's on the Turner Valley side, or that is on the Black Diamond side. So yeah, it's going to take residents of the town a while too to get used to it.
For sure. So let's talk about this upcoming weekend. Do a little bit of a preview. There is a pretty big match at Spruce Meadows on Saturday afternoon. It's going to be the Cavs playing the Wanderers from Halifax. Halifax has really played well this year.
Well, Halifax is in 5th and Cavalry is in 3rd. But if you look at their matches against each other thus far, Halifax does appear to have the upper hand. They beat Cavalry in Halifax in mid-June. I think it was 2-1 or 3-1. It was a 3-1 win for Wanderers on June 17th. And then it was a 2-2 draw the last time these two faced each other at Spruce Meadows. That was that game that I think both teams entered that game after 4 or 5 game tying streaks. So it's hard to predict what's going to happen this Saturday. But no, I think Wanderers have had some really impressive results. And their new head coach, Patrice Geyser, was he selected as coach of the month or something for June?
He was, yes.
Yeah. So I think this is going to be a great game. Honestly, it could go either way.
Yeah, when you say that Halifax is in 5th place, that really, I know it to be true, but I find it hard to sort of compute that because to me, they're right up there, very even, very similar to the Cavs. And I feel like this is definitely not playing like a lesser opponent. I feel this is a team which is a real good matchup for them, and a game where playing at home, I really think that it's a game you would expect to win. It should be, I fully expect it to be a really good match.
Well, I think Wanderers, they've only lost 3 games out of 14. So I think that might be why the thing with them is they've drawn so many, right? They've drawn more games than any other CPL club this year. So like I said already, I think this is a hard game to predict, and it's really going to come down to which team shows up, which players show up.
So we've got that going on Saturday afternoon, and a couple other notes I just want to mention about League One Alberta and AMSL. There are a couple matches happening this weekend if you are available. On the women's side, Blizzard are playing Edmonton Scottish at Broadview Friday night at 7 p.m. And on Sunday evening, the Cavs U20s are playing Edmonton Scottish at 7:30 p.m. at Shoaldice. So a couple opportunities to see those matches. And then in AMSL, I think the one match to mention is Saturday afternoon, which there is Foothills WFC is playing Lethbridge at the Macron Performance Center. So I think that pretty much covers most everything. Anything else you want to talk about, Scott?
Not in particular. I think we may have a high-profile interview coming up. I say may because it's certainly not confirmed yet, but don't even want to say the name and jinx it. So,
Yeah.
But if you keep listening to us, in a couple of episodes, you may hear an interview with the person I'm talking about.
We shall see. Thank you for listening to the YYC Soccer Podcast. You can subscribe to this podcast using all the usual podcasting platforms. Head over to our website at yycsoccer.com for more information about how to subscribe or how to leave a question or comment. You can also follow us on Twitter at YYC Soccer 403. Thanks for listening.